So now we've eradicated our admin ng module, we're then presented with a bunch of errors. Now this is because our components that are registered are donut card, form, list, and single. One, are not standalone components, but secondly, do not have the particular imports that we require. So for this, we're going to fix up these issues by migrating them, one, to standalone components, but also providing the components in the components that are needed. So you can see here that we have donut form is not a known element, and that is because we're no longer registering all of these components in an ng module, which makes them usable throughout our admin module. So we need to, one by one, start to import them in here. Now the first change that we're going to make is add this standalone true to each component. So go ahead, change our donut single to a standalone component. We'll do the same for donut list, donut form, and our donut card. This then enables our standalone mode, and it's up to us now to go and import the correct dependencies. Now, if we start from the top, we'll close off all of our files for now. Our essential home page is our list component. So if we open up our list, we have things such as router link. So this is a router directive. We currently do not have any provider imports. So it's no wonder that we're getting an error. Similarly, inside of our donut card, you can see that can't bind to router links as it's not a known property inside of our donut card component. So the first step is we need to go ahead and import these because we're using router link and router link inside of our donut card. If we dive in, we can, of course, see the bindings, and we also have things such as ng class. So we'll start with our donut card. We're going to use this lesson to essentially understand how to provide directives and pipes on a component level. Now this is interesting because we have router link, we have ng class. We're also using a currency pipe, such as here, which is obviously unknown as well. No pipe found with the name. We're using an ng switch as well as an ng switch case. So we need to actually import these individually. Now we know how to import our router module. So this is then going to give us access to those directives. So you can see that immediately this begins to work. At the moment, our error says can't bind to router link. So if we go ahead and naturally save this, this is then going to give us a slightly different error. Can't bind to ng class. Now this is a recent change in the Angular core, whereby we could fix this quite simply by adding this common module and then hitting save. And then we have this no directive for ng form, which is now looking in our next component. However, there was a recent change made where we do not have to import this entire module. So Angular's trying to then give us these directives individually. So instead of our common module, we can in fact import ng class by itself. You can see as we hover over here, we do not see any errors because this ng class has been made standalone by the Angular team. Now, if we go and hit save, you can see that we have ng switch, cannot bind to it. So naturally, we now need to go and import our ng switch. Now, because we are also using our ng switch case, we want to import this as well. So if we say ng switch case, we can import that directive as well. We also want to include our currency pipe. You can see we have no pipe found with the name of currency. We can then hit save. So this is our component converted to standalone. We have those imports. Now the reason I've put router module first is because it's essentially the last ng module. We have ng class, ng switch case, and the currency pipe. So these have all recently been made standalone by Angular, and we can then import them as so. So there are no errors in this component anymore. It's completely working. It's 100% standalone. So let's close it off and move to our next component. We have our donut list, which is using our router link. Now, this is interesting because we need to then import again our router module. Hit enter, make sure that that has been imported up above. We can then hit save, and this then provides us the correct router link directive. Now, the reason it's not giving us an error before is because we weren't in fact binding to it. If we go and do something like this and pass in a binding, you can see that it's recognizing that it doesn't exist. So this is a small gotcha, and it's important for us to actually look at the directives we're using and ensure that we are providing them. Now, this is something I found out that only applies at the moment to the router module. And as I mentioned, this is a developer preview, and this is probably going to change in the future. What's interesting now is, even though we do hit save, we're using our donut card. We know that we fixed the errors with that, but we're now getting donut card is not a known element. So what's happening now? It's because we're using standalone components. So our donut card is standalone. However, we're not actually importing it. So if we say donut card component, hit enter, this then gets imported above. I'm just going to reorder these and add that nice gap in between the Angular logic and our application logic. We can then hit save, scroll down into our template, and everything is looking nice and clean. From my perspective, our donut card is now successful. Our donut list no longer has any errors, so we need to do the same with our donut single component. You can see that we have our donut form is not a known element. So again, what we need to do is add our imports. We need to then go ahead and import our donut form component. We'll hit enter, make sure that that gets imported above. I'm going to then group our application logic, our component, our model, and our service. We can then hit save. This is not then giving us any template errors because our donut form component is now registered in our single component. So that's another error fixed. And I think by working this way, it kind of shows us all the pieces that we need to take care of when we're creating these standalone components, which means that the final piece of the puzzle is to target our form directive and make sure this has also been provided. So let's go underneath our standalone. We can add imports and that array. Now at the moment, all of this exists in the forms module. It would be nice to import, for example, ngForm. If we do provide this, you can see that the error at the bottom appears in imports, but is not standalone. Now this may change in the future, but at the moment we have to import the ng module itself. So make sure that that is imported. So now if we hit save, things are working for us quite nicely. However, we have a few more errors. So if we check out our errors in the console, we then have can't bind to ngIf, can't bind to ngIf else, because it's not a known property. So we know what to do here. So inside of our imports, we can import ngIf, make sure you hit enter, and that's automatically imported above. We also need to import ng4of, and this is an important thing to remember. We're not importing ng4 by itself because it has no exported member. The actual directive for ng4 is ng4of. If you flick back to the earlier chapter, we explain all this when we unravel things such as when we use our ng template, we use that ng4of explicitly. So let's save this out and give it a refresh. We have one more error, which is on our donut list. So we've actually missed an import down in here. So Angular's errors are very nice and helpful. We have an ngIf nested on our ng container. So let's go ahead and import our ngIf. We can then hit save, give things a refresh. We now have another error because not only are we using ngIf, but we're also using an ng4 here. So we need to go and import ng4 and then of, add the comma, hit save, and things are working perfectly for us. So we can then click through, we can update our form accordingly and go back, create a new one if we'd like. So this is essentially converted our application over to a standalone approach. For this, we've imported the directives individually. We've imported the components individually. We've converted each of these over to a standalone component, and we've ended up with an admin routes file, which has these components that we no longer need to specify. We don't need our router module. We don't need the forms common module or the ng module. So we can begin to clean up our routes. We can dive down into the bottom of our admin routes as well and simply eradicate our comment. So again, we're left with a nice file. We have our container component, which are being used as routing definitions. And in the next lesson, we're going to convert these over to a code split lazy loaded component, which is going to help us further optimize our application for performance. We've piece by piece understood and traced back all the errors. And it's quite apparent here that we have to follow some kind of trail of errors to slowly migrate things across. We fix one error in another file, and Angular then gives us an error in another file. So there's some back and forth as we figure things out, but we've reached a really nice point where our application is pretty standalone. We've understood the standalone true flag and how to import any of the dependencies that we need.